So in recent weeks, the great DEI debate has been shaking up boardrooms. And there really hasn't been a topic as polarizing or as misunderstood, in corporate America in recent times as this particular topic. And companies are struggling to decide where they stand on this spectrum of yays or nays on this issue, and quite frankly, how to defend their position. And what's fascinating about all of this is just how divided the responses have been. So, on one side, you've got big Fortune 500 companies like Google, Meta, Walmart, and Target all announcing that they're either scaling back or outright scrapping their DEI initiatives. And on the other side, you've got companies like JP Morgan Chase, Costco, and Cisco standing firm and reaffirming their commitments. Now, you've got to ask yourself, right? How exactly did we get here? And is what is happening a sign of a larger cultural shift in corporate America, or is this simply a strategic recalibration in response to external pressures? And more importantly, what are the consequences for our society? Now, for the critics of DEI, you really got to ask, what part of DEI do you disagree with? Is it the diversity? Is it the equity? Or is it the inclusion, right? Just help me understand that, because at their core, can't we all agree that these are fundamentally good for society? Isn't it good to have a diverse workforce that reflects the multicultural society, the world, the reality of the world that we live in today? Isn't it good to have equitable opportunities? And isn't it good to create inclusive environments where people feel they can belong? With regards to diversity, let's face it, right? The reality of a diverse and multicultural society, this is not just a possibility that's on the horizon. It's a reality that's unfolding right before our eyes. And as they say, whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. A report by Brookings Institute has projected that by 2045, minorities will make up the new majority in the United States. And this will be driven primarily by increased immigration and youthful minority groups. And you see, that right there may very well explain the Trump administration's aggressive stance on immigration, the hardline policies, the attacks on birthright citizenship, the sweeping crackdowns, which just don't make any sense. They understand that demographic change is inevitable. And for those who are clinging to this outdated power structure, limiting immigration is the last desperate move to slow the tide. But history tells us that change doesn't wait for permission. It moves forward, with or without us. One key viewpoint that has been expressed by critics of DEI is that it is discriminatory and that it attempts to perhaps solve discrimination by disadvantaging another group, which is white Americans. And another viewpoint is that it is a threat to meritocracy. This idea that people should get opportunities based solely on their talent and their abilities. And now, in a perfect world, right, that's not such a bad idea. But let's be honest. Is it realistic to believe that race, gender, and systemic barriers don't play a role in shaping the opportunities that people get? Is it realistic to think that we live in a colorblind, genderblind society where we all get the same access, the same opportunities, the same rewards? People like Bill Ackman, a billionaire hedge fund investor, think so. You see, Bill was one of the first individuals to shockingly take a public stance against DEI in 2023 when he posted this on X. He said, "When one examines DEI and its ideological heritage, it does not take long to understand that the movement is inherently inconsistent with basic American values. Our country, since its founding, has been creating and building a democracy with equality of opportunity for all people." Now, I say shockingly because Bill is he is quite a prolific philanthropist and signee of the Giving Pledge. He has committed at least 50% of his wealth by the end of his life to charitable causes. As of 2024, he is one of the largest donors to Planned Parenthood, and many organizations. He is not somebody that you would traditionally expect, right? Would be against anything that represents the idea of a more equitable society. I just can't understand how you could be such a fervent philanthropist, but not a supporter of DEI, which means that either your understanding of DEI is completely skewed, or you just don't like one or several of the groups that it is designed to support, right? But to go back to his reasoning, he said, our country, since its founding, has been about creating and building a democracy with equity and opportunity for all. So get this. He is saying that since 1776, this country has stood for equal opportunity for everyone. Now, are we missing something here? Is slavery equal opportunity? Because it wasn't until almost a century later that it was abolished. Is segregation equal opportunity? Is denying women and Black people the right to vote equal opportunity? Oh, how I would love for Bill to invite me to dinner and break down for me over a nice meal, perhaps a filet mignon or something, what exactly he means by equal opportunity. Because if we are to take even the briefest glance at the first 400 years of American history, what we see, the reality of it, is systemic discrimination based on race and gender that was written into law, enforced by policy, and upheld by culture. That is not equal opportunity. That's exclusion by design. And so to pretend otherwise, to rewrite that history as some kind of fair playing field, that's not just misleading, that's dangerous rhetoric. Perhaps what he meant to say is that it has been an aspiration, right? A goal since the founding of this country to have a democracy with equity of opportunity for all. And that would be understanding. But even to that, I would say, Bill, isn't that exactly why you should be supporting DEI policies? And you know who supports Bill, right? People like Elon Musk. Now, let's get this straight. I'm not saying that DEI programs have all been inherently perfect. They have not. You know, like many policies, they have had unintended consequences, which are sometimes difficult to address. But we can't deny the progress that has been made in this country as a result of DEI policies, and no one can argue that the harm has been more than the benefits. But here's the thing. What the critics have failed to address is their plan. What's their plan to address the inequities that these programs were designed to confront in the first place, other than just making this a politicized issue? Well, I've got an answer for you. None, because they don't believe there is a problem. So there is no plan. Actually, they believe that they are rather the victims. So on November 20th, 2024, Republicans introduced a bill, an anti-DEI bill aiming to eliminate all DEI programs and offices across the federal government. But here's the kicker. The bill didn't just call for shutting down DEI initiatives. It went even further. Buried in the language of this bill was a clause stating that any federal employee working in a DEI-related role wouldn't just lose their job. No, they would also be barred from being reassigned to any other federal position. Think about this. To be clear, what this means is if you worked in DEI, not only are you fired, but you cannot work in another federal agency at all. Now, who do you think is the most likely group to work in these DEI roles? Well, this bill made its way to a House Oversight Committee hearing, and that's where things, got very interesting. Because during that hearing, Congressman Clay Higgins, who is a Republican from Louisiana, repeatedly described DEI policies as, wait for it, oppression against white people. Oppression. And this is where Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett steps in.
But you consistently said over and over the word oppression, and every time that you said it, it was almost as if I was hearing nails on a chalkboard, because it seems like you don't understand the definition of oppression, and I'd ask you to just refer to Google to help you out. Oppression is the prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or control. That is the definition of oppression. And so as I sit here as a Black woman who practiced civil rights, let me tell you the reason that my colleagues wanted to make sure you understood the same Black history that your side of the aisle wants to delete out of classrooms is because you can then misuse words like oppression. There has been no oppression for the white man in this country. You tell me which white men were dragged out of their homes. You tell me which one of them got dragged all the way across an ocean and told that you are going to go and work. We are going to steal your wives. We are going to rape your wives. That didn't happen. That is oppression. We didn't ask to be here. We're not the same migrants that y'all constantly come up against. We didn't run away from home. We were stolen. So yeah, we are going to sit here and be offended when you want to sit here and act like, and don't let it escape you that it is white men on this side of the aisle telling us, people of color on this side of the aisle, that y'all are the ones being oppressed, that y'all are the ones that are being harmed. That's not the definition of oppression. You tell me the prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment that you've had, and we can have a conversation.
You tell me the uncruel, unjust treatment you've had, and then we can talk. Let's keep watching.
There is an article from The Guardian, and it is a little old. It's from 2021, so I apologize. But it said that back then, just 3 years ago, white men represent 30% of the population, but 62% of office holders. These are the issues that we are constantly looking at and recognizing and trying to say, is this just? I can't even tell you how many white men have served in this chamber, but I can tell you that I am only the 55th Black woman to be elected to Congress. And so when you want to talk about history and pretend as if it was so long ago, it wasn't. Because again, I am just number 55.
So you see, I love history. It was one of my favorite subjects in school. So whenever something happens, I love just digging in and revisiting history to see if there is something it can tell us about the present or future. It does, after all, repeat itself, doesn't it? So it's really important that we take a step back and look at the history of this nation, and more specifically, the origins of DEI. How did it come about? Where did it come from? And it can be traced all the way back to the Civil Rights Act of 1866, right? This was passed in the aftermath of the Civil War. It was America's first federal law aimed at defining citizenship and protecting the civil rights of all citizens, including formerly enslaved people who before that did not have any rights. For the first time, it affirmed that people of African descent born in the United States were American citizens, and that they were entitled to the same basic rights as white citizens, rights like buying and selling, inheriting real estate and property, the right to make and enforce contracts, and more. But you see, rights on paper didn't mean rights in practice, right? So sure, now you could own your own property, you can invest, you can get a great education, but you're still starting from generations behind. And not only that, but you're still stuck in a system that sees you and your kind as inferior. So DEI policies came into play to address precisely that disparity, to try to level that playing field to some extent. So it's like entering a relay race after everyone else has already had a 10-lap head start, right? And DEI is coming in to say, okay, these people were left behind, so let's give them some sort of a power boost so that they can run maybe just a little bit faster. But even then, we know that they may never catch up because they are already too far behind, and they are still stuck in a system. But guess what? Even the promises of the 1866 Act were short-lived. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Jim Crow laws erased many of these protections, deepening segregation and inequality. It wasn't until nearly a century later, during the civil rights movement of the 1960s, that the nation made another concerted effort to tackle systemic inequalities. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a major turning point. It became the cornerstone of modern DEI efforts, prohibiting discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Now, Title A specifically targeted workplace discrimination and required companies to now take active steps to prevent it. Then, in 1965, going further, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed Executive Order 11246, which introduced affirmative action. Federal contractors were now required to take proactive steps to ensure equal employment opportunities. Affirmative action was very bold, and yes, it was also very controversial, but it led to significant increases in representation for women, in minorities, in workplaces, and universities. Many of us wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for affirmative action. So by the late 80s and early 90s, the narrative shifted. Diversity was no longer just a legal or moral obligation. It was a business strategy. Research started to show that diverse teams performed better. They were more innovative. They were faster. They contributed to growth and success. And so many companies started adopting it as a strategy, as part of their business strategy. And then came 2000s, when the concepts of equity and inclusion rounded out the DEI framework, right? Equity addressed systemic barriers, and then inclusion focused on culture, right? Ensuring that diverse employees felt empowered and that they would feel valued. And then you fast forward to 2020, after the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Here, we started to see corporate America pledging billions of dollars to racial equity. Chief diversity officers were hired, ambitious diversity goals were set across board. And for a moment, you would think that DEI had reached its tipping point. But as history has often shown, progress is rarely linear. In 2023, a Supreme Court ruling in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, which struck down affirmative action in college admissions, will overturn the 45-year legal precedence of DEI policies. In this case, the plaintiff, Students for Fair Admissions, alleged that Harvard College violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment in Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because the admissions process intentionally discriminated against Asian American applicants based on their race and ethnicity. On June 29, 2023, the Supreme Court held that race-conscious affirmative action, that is, the consideration of an applicant's race as one factor in making an admissions decision, particularly to realize the educational benefits of diversity, is unconstitutional. This ruling emboldened critics of DEI programs, leading to increased scrutiny and legal challenges against diversity initiatives. Now, one of the notable early cases that sought to make an example of the validity of this ruling against programs was the Fearless Fund lawsuit. Remember that? The Fearless Fund, an Atlanta-based venture capital firm dedicated to supporting Black women entrepreneurs, was sued by the American Alliance for Equal Rights, founded by conservative activist Edward Blum, alleging that the fund's program, which offered $20,000 grants exclusively to Black women-owned small businesses, violated Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which prohibits racial discrimination in contracting. Initially, a U.S. district judge denied AAER's request to halt the grant program. However, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals later reversed this decision, ruling that the program likely violated federal law due to its race-based eligibility criteria. In September 2024, to resolve the lawsuit, the Fearless Fund, unfortunately, agreed to permanently discontinue the Strivers Grant contest. Within just hours of taking office in January 2025, President Trump signed executive orders dismantling all equity initiatives and DEI considerations in federal hiring and programs. And almost immediately, corporate America took notice. Some companies started scrambling, reassessing their DEI commitments, not out of conviction, but out of fear. fear of lawsuits, fear of backlash, fear of being the next target in this growing assault on DEI. And let's be honest, right? There were some who saw this as an opportunity, a convenient excuse to quietly walk away from something they never really believed in the first place. Because for them, DEI wasn't a mission, it wasn't a business strategy, it was just a box to check. And now they've been handed the perfect justification to uncheck it. Some of the biggest names pulling back, companies like Target and Walmart, surprised many people because they have long positioned themselves as champions of DEI, making bold commitments over the years. And let's not forget that these are brands heavily patronized by Black consumers, the very communities that their DEI initiatives were meant to uplift. So here we are. And we really got to ask ourselves, is history repeating itself? And if it is, what exactly are we looking at? Is it a rollback of hard-fought progress, a modern-day Jim Crow, a quiet return to segregation under the guise of neutrality and meritocracy? Because here's the thing, history doesn't just repeat itself. It's repeated by those who refuse to confront it, by those who benefit from rewriting it, and by those who stand by hoping it will just level itself out. But progress has never been passive, at least for us. It has never been something we wait for. It has always been something we had to fight for. So the real question isn't just whether history is repeating, it's whether we're going to let it. I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. If you are enjoying this podcast, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. My name is Sandra Bebu Boateng. See you next time.